As we're all gathering together and everybody's getting to your seats, I want to go ahead and just take a couple seconds, if I can, to do some introductions, set expectations for our day together today. I'll begin with just my self-introduction. I'm Alan Lang with Valley Vision. We are a nonprofit organization that has been working with Stanislaus County on the Housing Stanislaus initiative, getting us to the point where we now have a report that's ready for release and actually is on your tables in front of you today, and gives us this opportunity to talk about housing within Stanislaus County at today's summit. So again, really appreciate you all being here today. And as we get into some of the details, I first want to thank Modesto Junior College, who had in-kind donation of this facility, of this space, which is really suiting us very well. Yes, thank you, thank you. And a really great opportunity for us to come together. The reason that the county initiated Housing Stanislaus is to really help us establish a shared understanding of the needs and challenges that are associated with housing in Stanislaus County. We also want to pair that with a shared vision and strategy framework for how can we move forward? What can we do to make a difference, to make housing more readily available for all of our residents? And that has been our goal throughout, and as we go through today, I'll go through different data and other pieces that I'll talk about in the agenda, but it's been a lot of effort to get us to where we are today, and hopefully everybody is here with the right kind of mindset to be thinking through how can we work together to advance housing within our community. So I'm going to start, though, before getting into welcoming comments, welcoming speakers, just some housekeeping issues, setting norms for us today. On the housekeeping front, a few things. Hopefully everybody saw the refreshments just right outside the doors on the other side of that wall. They will be there all day, so if you need to restock or retank at any point, please do. If you need to use restrooms, they are out the doors that are at the back side of the wall. And then to the right, you just go down that little hallway and then a left turn before you get outside. The restrooms are inside, so don't go out that door, but just down that hallway to the left, you'll find the restrooms. If we do have a reason that we need to evacuate the building, if it's safe, we can go back through the entrance that we came in. But you can see in this room, we have emergency exits on both sides. That one's harder to see, but there's another door over there. So just know that those are there. Again, hopefully that won't be needed today. I'm not anticipating anything. And if you do have, if you could either silence phones, if you need to take a phone call during the session, if you could just step outside the door so we don't have the extra noise coming in, that would be very much appreciated. So let me talk about some of the meeting norms. As we gather here today, we want to make sure that we're all coming with a very kind of constructive approach, constructive mindset. So we ask that you have an open mind as you're hearing the data, hearing the information. What are things that reinforce what you know? What are new things that you're being exposed to? And how might other circumstances be different than what you're used to? So keep that open mind and actively listen to what we're sharing and talking about today. Of course, be respectful and assume good intentions as well. Again, I think that you are in this room because you have an interest in housing. I think all of us have that. And hopefully we can work together, find ways that we can collaborate and move the housing issue forward within our county. The next item on this list I saw actually a lot of in this last hour as people have been getting coffee, getting refreshments. Build the network. Housing is a very complicated, complex issue. And seeing all you talking with one another, whether that's people that you knew already, people that you've met today, we need to keep that forward in housing, frankly, across all issues, all topics, so that we're really exploring what are all those resources, what are the opportunities that we have, what do we have that we can leverage from one another and work with one another on. So really use this and settings like this as that opportunity to help expand that network, and then call on that as you can. How can you work with someone that you met and find new ways to do things, whether it's housing or something related to other issues as well. Last couple notes that I have are about just the kind of input communication as we go through this session today. There are note cards that are on each one of your tables. Should be a handful of those. Thank you. You were my demo. Could you do that again? Right there. So if you have questions or comments throughout the day, please go ahead and write it on that note card. Raise it up, and we'll have staff that are going to be around the room that will collect those. And at the end of each one of our segments, we'll save a little bit of time for some Q&A. We might not get to all the questions and answering them in real time directly today, but we will follow up in writing with any of those questions that come in. So Do make use of that for, again, any comments or questions that you have. And then the last thing about communications, we are going to have a couple different sessions today for those that are both brave and willing, using the Menti tool. It's an online platform that you're able to access from your smartphone. Fairly simple to use. We'll pull up and you can see actually on your agenda, at the bottom of your agenda, it gives you a QR code that you can scan to get there, or a URL that you can go to. And as we get to those segments in the agenda, you just go to that and there will be opportunities for you to answer some questions that we have. So again, if you're willing to do that, you just use your phone to do so, and we'll call that out when we get to those moments. So with that is kind of our meeting norms and then the housekeeping issues. I'm going to go ahead and kick us off here. We are very fortunate to be joined by Supervisor Manny Graywall from the Stanislaus County Board of Supervisors to give us some opening comments today and kick us off for today's summit. So Supervisor Graywall, come on up. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Good morning, everyone. I want to welcome everyone this morning on a Saturday in the morning, so you know you're committed to the cause when you show up at a Saturday morning, early morning to have this meeting. So on behalf of the Stanislaus County Board of Supervisors, I'm honored to welcome you to the Housing Stanislaus Summit. So together we're here today to address what we all acknowledge as a very critical issue. One of the most important issues we face not only in Stanislaus County, but throughout the state. Whenever you go to any event, the two things that everyone wants to know what the county is doing and what the county is working on in regards to homelessness and housing. And how could those two conversations be separate? If we're addressing homelessness, then we need to address moderate housing, market rate housing, affordable housing. It's not just a one-pronged effort. It's multifaceted. It's very complex. Just the changes we've seen over the last 20 years. So the good thing is Stanislaus County's population is going to continue to grow. In 2011, we were at 512,000 people. In 2021, we were at 551,000. And in 2031, we project to be at 561,000. On the flip side, the housing units being built in Stanislaus County are declining. So you know that the issue is only getting further, becoming a further challenge when population is increasing. The amount of units we built between 2001 and 2019 was 30,317 units. In the decade after, from 2010 to 2019, we've built 5,013 units. So there was a recession in between that, now the pandemic. But again, that's a huge concern when you're seeing that disparity of the population growth and seeing that those units aren't being built. So the demand is there, the supply isn't. You guys can come to your own assumptions and your own conclusion that that's an issue. The other issue, and I'm speaking off notes, I see this just on the business side of things, native Stanislaus residents of Stanislaus County are getting priced out of the housing market. Since the pandemic, people are able to now work a hybrid work schedule. They can work from home, and that there's huge benefits to that. But one of the things that's happened is housing here has gone up year over year because our neighbors from the Bay Area now are making that decision to live here in Stanislaus County, have a larger home, have a backyard, a front yard, a place to have their family reside at a more affordable price than what they could afford in the Bay Area, right? A house in the Bay Area, 3-bedroom, 2-bath in Santa Clara probably runs you about $1 million. Here, although we are shocked by the prices that have gone up over the last 5 to 7 years, but you could still get a home here, 3-bedroom, 2-bath in the mid 400,000s, which 5 years ago nobody thought that price. I mean, you're looking at $300 a square foot. In the recession, houses were being sold at $70 a square foot. So how the prices have gone up in the last 10 years. And that's unfortunate because people that have born, brought up, reside here for many, many years, now themselves or their children can't afford houses here in Stanislaus County. They love living here. They've been accustomed to all the things that Stanislaus County has to offer, but they're getting priced out of the housing market. So I don't want to push the subject that this is a complex subject, but what we can do together, and that's what we're doing today. There's this Housing Summit. I know there's one later on in the afternoon. I know Stanislaus Equity Partners put one summit about a month ago. So the conversations are being had. Is that a step in the right direction? Absolutely. This is not going to be solved. Stanislaus County cannot solve this. City of Modesto cannot solve this. It's a multifaceted approach by our nonprofits, our faith-based organizations, our housing developers that will make that investment to say it's not always about the bottom line. It's always trying to help the community. So you might not make per unit the amount of money that you want to make as a traditional developer, but if there's partnerships with the county, with the city that we can help with, whether it's permitting, whether it's fees, whatever it may be, and I'm not committing to any of that. I'll let staff handle that. I'm smarter than that. So this is a shared responsibility, and it's commitment to our community. So I just want to express my sincere gratitude that all of you are taking this very important issue very seriously, and I look forward to seeing the results that we will all benefit from over the next decade. Thank you so much. Welcome to Stanislaus County, and thanks for having this much-needed conversation.
Incredibly well stated. Thank you, Supervisor. As we get into some of this discussion, I got to say first, thank you for the passion and energy that you bring to the issue, to the housing issue. That is what's needed. That's what's needed from elected officials, from all of us in the room to make sure that we are continuing to move that forward. We have people who are voicing the support and the need for housing. So you absolutely nailed it and in all the points. And I'm actually going to go through, echo some of what you said with some of the data points, et cetera, as we move through the presentation. So thank you very much for the leadership that you're showing on this issue. So let me walk through with everybody, just kind of a quick run through on what we're going to be doing today. As we look at the agenda, as I look over my shoulder, make sure that slide changed. How we're going to walk through today, I'm going to go through a little bit of data with you just to help give the state of housing in Stanislaus County. What is the context? What's the kind of quantifiable information? And hopefully excite you with some of that data. It'll be some of the things that maybe you already know. I think there'll be some things that are eye-opening for you as well. We'll also be talking about housing development barriers and opportunities. Primarily things that we learned through a long series of community interviews that we conducted as part of Housing Stanislaus to really identify and showcase what are those things that are going really well, what are the challenges that people are experiencing, and then that leads to what are those potential opportunities or solutions. As we're going through some of those challenges and barriers, as well as talking about what those strategies are that we as a community, and again, I want to note the supervisor, this is a collective issue. It's not one person's responsibility. It's not one entity or one jurisdiction's responsibility. This is something that we all need to come together on to make that change, because housing is a very complex issue. A lot of different things need to come together to enable that construction and that development to happen. As we go through some of those strategies, very fortunate to be joined by two amazing practitioners today who are going to be really our featured speakers for today, talking about a couple of these issues and opportunities or strategies that can be used to help further housing. One is Kate Owens from HRNA. She is going to be talking about housing trust funds and some of her experience around what those have looked like, what's made them successful in other areas. And we also have Mitali Ganguly from Opticos Design, who's going to be talking about missing middle housing, a segment of housing that often gets, I'll say, underdeveloped in terms of how much is available. So a lot of great expertise, and we're going to be diving in much more deeply into those two topics today. And again, hopefully that leads to new opportunities that we can pursue and explore here in Stanislaus County. After we get through the discussion about those strategies, what are the things that we want to do to move housing forward? We'll end up having closing comments from County Executive Jody Hayes to close us out for today. And I hope, although we'll be closing today's Housing Stanislaus Summit, again, this is just a step, an early step, and hoping that all of us can continue to work together and take our whatever steps we can respectively take to help move the housing issue and advance the housing issue within Stanislaus County. Okay, so let me go ahead and jump to kind of a first segment. We want to go, before I jump into data, this is our first Minty exercise that I discussed during the housekeeping segment. Want to learn a little bit more about who is in the room with us today. So on your agenda, and I should note on the tables, you have the agenda in front of you. There's also the Housing Stanislaus report, so if you want to look through that, that'll be where all the information we covered today is really sourced from. But most importantly on that agenda, you can go to minty.com. You can use that QR code to get there, or go to minty.com and enter the code that you see. Again, it's on the screen, the 2334-5881. And once you're there, and I actually think that's accurate because I will go ahead and click it. Okay, all right, perfect. Okay, thank you. So the comment was you have to enter it manually if you're having trouble getting through. And our first question for you, in which community do you live? So city, could be a town, a community within Stanislaus County or elsewhere. I'm just trying to get a feel for who's in the room with us today. And as you can see on this word cloud going, it keeps changing as people are stating where they're from. Looking at good mix, we have Modesto with the most, perhaps not surprising. We are in Modesto. It is our largest population center within Stanislaus County. Also, Oakdale, Turlock, Ceres, multiple from Bay Area that are with us today as well. Manteca with us today as well. So a good mix. We have Denair, one of the communities within Stanislaus County. So good mix here, and that's really what we want. I'm going to emphasize again, the Housing Stanislaus effort was not about any specific jurisdiction. It wasn't about just the unincorporated county. It wasn't about any of our specific cities. It is about Stanislaus County as a whole and as a county-wide effort. So really good to see this diverse representation that we have today. And I'm going to go to move us from there, from our first question, into our second question for today. And that is, how long have you lived in Stanislaus County? And some of you are already in here. This is a very tech-savvy crowd. Appreciate it. Thank you. See a lot of options there, so you just choose which one most relates to you. And leading the way right now, we have all my life and more than 20 years. So again, speaking to that, a lot of people have been in Stanislaus County for quite a while. And oftentimes, the most impacted is we're seeing, whether it's through the migration coming from elsewhere or frankly just the kind of supply and demand issues that go with housing, the increasing housing prices. Those that have been longtime residents are every bit as impacted, oftentimes more impacted than some of those that are newer to our community. So a good mix though, we have a good percentage of less than 2 years, so people newer to the county, and then moving all the way through that for throughout their life. And then my final question for now, and we will come back to Minty a little later in the session today. So our final question, in what role are you participating in today's summit? And this just to give us a feel of kind of the who's in the room. We know this is not an exhaustive list, so if there is something that kind of fits, you know, what your approach is, what you're looking to learn from today, that would be really helpful. Okay, good. Good mix. I will note that on the business community, employer side, that will be one that we'll continue to try and engage, especially after today, to follow up and make sure that there is good communication going out there and engagement, because the business community, employers, critically important for housing, both in terms of what their needs are for their employers, but also just kind of the support and energy that they can bring to the topic. So. All right, but what I really like about each one of those questions, goes back to the diversity in the room. And that is really, really important for us to make sure that we have people from different backgrounds, different experiences, living in different areas within our community, and having all those that are helping support the cause for increasing, stimulating housing development, and making sure that it is something that we're keeping front of mind for all of us that are living in Stanislaus County. So thank you all for indulging me on that piece. And as we're looking at a bar chart right now, next on our agenda, actually some more data. You're going to see some more charts. I am hoping that this is more exciting you with data and giving you, as I mentioned earlier, maybe some points that you're already very well aware of, hopefully some new ideas, new ways of looking at some of the information and what's happening with housing in Stanislaus County. As Supervisor Graywall had said in the opening, we are at a current population in Stanislaus County of about 550,000 people. Saw a huge increase from 2010 to 2020, or in this case, 2011 to 2021. Really, really massive growth over that 10-year period. The growth is expected, I'll say forecasted, to level off over the next 10 years, about 10,000 new residents. This is an editorial comment from me. I think that since the pandemic and the work from home model has really changed the way where people are living, I think it's a little bit more difficult to truly accurately forecast what population growth is going to look like. So this is one I would still expect, as we're still kind of getting that dust to settle on where people are living, especially if they can work remotely, what that end number is, or 10 years down the road for us, what that's going to look like. But even if these numbers hold true, seeing a population growth of about 50,000 people over a 20-year period, in and of itself speaks to the necessity of having housing and enough housing, providing more housing supply to accommodate that kind of growth. It can't be accommodated with just the existing housing stock and expecting more people, more densely populated housing units. We just need more housing, period. One interesting note, and this is what the supervisor referenced as well in his opening comments. While we've seen this great population growth in Stanislaus County, after I'll call it the mortgage crisis and the Great Recession in the late 2000, the 2007, 8, 9, 10 period, we saw an absolute precipitous fall off, kind of off of a cliff in terms of the number of housing units that were being developed. You can see on this chart that's up each decade from the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s. Within Stanislaus County, there were a ballpark, plus or minus, 30,000 housing units being developed each decade. That fell off from 2010 to 2019 to just over 5,000 housing units. A drop of 83%, decade over decade, in number of housing units that were developed. The drop-off was not unique to Stanislaus County, but it was much more extreme in Stanislaus County. I believe the statewide drop-off, if you went decade to decade, was 55%, maybe pushing 60%, versus this 83% drop-off in Stanislaus County. So you can see it really has hit Stanislaus County hard. So you team that with a population growth and not much new housing getting built, that's where we start to run into the issue, and I'll go and use the word, but the issue of the crisis, the housing crisis that we are experiencing now, and what we need to be focused on and working with to help stimulate that housing development moving forward. One other data point I want to add on this, and this shows up on the screen, but the number of households, meaning people that needed a home, it could be an individual, it could be a household, but the number of household growth in Stanislaus County from 2010 until 2019 was nearly 9,000 additional households. That's how many households were added. Over that same period, only 5,000 new units were constructed. So you can see that's not quite double, but not far from it in terms of number of new households that are needed versus what was actually built. So we just have housing development that is not keeping pace with our population growth. And that leads us to why Housing Stanislaus really got started by Stanislaus County. One other thing I'm going to note in terms of that housing development and what that growth looks like. Housing Stanislaus Stanislaus County is dominated by single-family structures. I'll call it the traditional home. About 80% of all units fall in that category. which means there aren't as much things like duplexes, triplexes or fourplexes, townhomes, the smaller units. There just is not a lot of housing variety. And what's potentially, in my opinion anyway, even more troublesome than that is that as we saw even that slowdown in housing development over that past 10 years, we actually saw housing stock being taken out of the market for things like duplexes, mobile homes, small apartment or kind of townhome type units. There are actually fewer now than there were in 2010. So we're not making up ground, we're actually losing ground, and having that, one of those things that our guest speaker Matali is going to be talking about, that missing middle type housing, developing that, making sure that's available. So we're actually losing ground in terms of having that housing diversity within Stanislaus County. Something that I think we need to address and focus on to make sure that all residents, all families, regardless of their family type, their income level, what their lifestyle needs might be, they have a place that's appropriate for them to live. So what we see, as I've talked about, population growth, lack of housing development. What it results in is a very low housing vacancy rate. You can see on this chart that in Stanislaus County, right now, there's a housing vacancy rate of about 4.1%. That compares to a statewide average of 7.4%. You hear about it like, oh, 3 percentage point difference. It doesn't seem a lot, but you can also look at it more as, actually our vacancy rate is about half that is being seen elsewhere in other areas of the state. And what does that mean? That means that people who are seeking housing or needing to change their housing don't have as many options to choose from. As soon as they're coming across something that maybe is sort of in their price range or sort of meets the type of housing that they need, they're having to jump on it because there aren't a lot of other options out there. It also means just basic kind of supply and demand economic principles. The lack of housing supply versus growing demand is really putting upward pressure on housing prices, both the for sale housing price as well as rental housing prices, which is what I'm going to talk about now in a little, through these next couple slides. Within Stanislaus County, this is for the homeowner market, people with mortgages. You can see that median home sale price between 2018 and 2023 increased by $141,000. I'm going to say that again. Over a 5-year period, actually 4 years and change period, it increased by $141,000. So I want you to think about not only other residents, think about yourself. And has your circumstance or condition changed so much that it would be easy now for you to buy a home that's $141,000 more than it was 4 or 5 years ago? It presents a major barrier for our residents that are living here to be able to get the housing that they want and the housing that they need. And that's showing up in the pie chart that you see on the right-hand side, and that is individuals or families that are housing cost burdened. What housing cost burden means, this is a term that shorthand means that people that are spending more than 30% of their income on housing are considered housing cost burden. So the more that you're spending on housing, what's that doing? That's giving you less to spend on things like food, childcare, healthcare, other basic life necessities, let alone being able to put anything away into savings, which we know, especially looking at people that are involved in Stanislaus 2030, that aspect of being able to have savings so that you can get yourself and your family ahead is critically important. So when you're housing cost burden, you're not having any of those excess dollars to be able to put to some of those other needs. So that is, again, more than 1/3 of our residents that are homeowners are housing cost burden within Stanislaus County. Similar story in terms of housing cost burden, actually a worse story for those that are renters. The rental median monthly rent over that period of 2018 until 2022 increased by nearly $300 per month. So about $3,600 per year coming out of people's pockets to afford those rental homes that they have. So again, a major challenge for all of our residents to be able to keep pace with that increasing cost that we're seeing in the rental market. And we actually have, whereas about 1/3 of our homeowners were housing cost burdened, it's nearly half of our renters. Half of our renters are spending more than 30% of their income on that rental cost that they have. So again, that's taking away from their ability to invest in other life necessities that they might have. So really puts them in a very difficult spot, and frankly, a lot of these cases, individuals that are really living that paycheck to paycheck, month to month, just barely getting by, if they are even doing that. So again, these are the reasons why we need to really focus on increasing housing supply, getting an increase in the number of units that are available, both the rental market as well as the homeowner market. We just need more housing units, period. And as we get into kind of our next steps within the Housing Stanislaus report in our day today, just using that all to note as I walk through this data, what the challenges are, what our experiences have been over the past 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. The county initiated this idea, this Housing Stanislaus initiative, really with a focus on increasing housing supply throughout Stanislaus County so that we can meet the housing needs, both of those that are current residents as well as those who will be moving into the area, regardless of their income level, regardless of their family status, regardless of their ability. So we really need to take this on as a group. Again, not the responsibility of just the county, just the cities, just developers, but all of us really need to be working together and voicing that support so that we can move forward and make sure that we're starting to increase that, what we saw over the past decade, that 5,000 units of housing development. Hopefully we can change that trajectory and get it back up to what's needed, and whether that's the 30,000 units per decade or something else, but we definitely need to turn it up compared to where it's been now. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and pause my voice for a second and ask you all again to go back to the Menti exercise. And what we're going to do on this one is ask for you, this will be, you can fill in a couple, but in 1 or 2 words, because this is going to show up as a word cloud again. But what is your biggest hope for housing in Stanislaus County? You can enter multiple things if you want, but try and keep it limited to just 1 or 2 words per answer so it'll show up in a word cloud. So I'm going to leave this open for a little bit. We have some people starting to feed that information in. Thank you. Okay, as we see these coming in, affordability, affordable housing, few of the biggest. We see different variations on that. But that affordable issue is there. I also see inventory, more inventory, specific types of housing, like workforce housing. Workforce housing meaning kind of that, affordable to the, I'll call it the middle income individuals, whether it's, wage earners or otherwise. We have quality listed, wanting prices to come back, housing choice. So a lot of different input that's been provided here. And that really gets to, within our Housing Stanislaus report, what we wanted to achieve. We want to make sure that we're touching base on these things that you've been sharing, make sure that we have some specific strategies called out that will help address with the affordability issue, with the variety issues, all of those. And as we get into talking about some solutions, hopefully you'll see that reflected in what some of your hopes are, what your visions are for what housing could be and should be within Stanislaus County. So want to again thank everybody for taking that effort and again being so well primed and being able to use the Menti program. So I'm going to go through just a couple issues here. We talked about the data. That's why I spent the last several minutes kind of walking through. The data is critically important. It helps us, I'll say it helps ground us in where we're at, what do those numbers say? What can we look at over time to see what trends are? Where are we going? What direction are we heading? So the data is critically important. But what is even more important is the why. Why are those numbers as they are? Why are we seeing housing fall off? Why are we seeing those prices, the housing prices get to a point that it's unaffordable for so many of our residents within Stanislaus County? So as we were going through the Housing Stanislaus effort, One of our major points of emphasis in this was engaging a wide variety of stakeholders. It was people from the development community, real estate professionals, public agencies, housing advocates, residents or community representatives, social service organizations, employers. So really reached out to a wide variety of individuals to get their perspectives on what is their experience with housing, what do they think the needs are within Stanislaus County, what are the challenges or barriers that they're seeing and that they're experiencing or hearing from, could be their employees or others. And actually had, it was actually 70 some odd individuals that we talked to, whether that's through one-on-one interviews or group interviews, but felt it was a very kind of diverse segment of our population within Stanislaus County. What you now see on the board is highlighting just some of that information that they shared, and that was about what they were perceiving as some of the biggest barriers. What is preventing housing from getting developed at the scale that is needed within our county, within our community? These are not on this list in priority order. I just want to flag that, but these are kind of I'll call it the 5 kind of big themes, big buckets that came out that we heard very regularly, very consistently across the different stakeholders that we engaged. And I'm going to run through just really quickly on each of these, just provide a little bit more context, so it's not just kind of one word on a slide for you, but a little bit more detail than that. But I'm not going to necessarily dwell on these. I'm guessing a lot of these are things that you look at and say, yeah, I see that too. This makes sense to me. And hopefully there are some things that are on here that are like, oh, I hadn't thought about it that way before. First issue on this list is community opposition to housing development, which is always going to be the case. That's in every community. It is vocal. And one of the issues that was interesting to us anyway, as we were talking to these different stakeholders, I would describe it as almost uniform and universal agreement that there needs to be more housing within Stanislaus County. We need more development. Where we run into the issue is at the micro level, when that specific housing development is getting proposed and where is it located. And what we find is that the opposition then comes out is oftentimes vocal in their opposition, and there isn't a lot that's countering that. There isn't much coming out to whether it's Board of Supervisors meetings, City Council meetings, other settings, Planning Commission meetings, really voicing that support for housing. So a lot of times what's heard is that vocal opposition that might be a limited number of people, but it is what is in the decision makers. I don't mean this is a loaded term, but it's what's in their face. So that is something that is very regular, and there needs to be some counterbalance to that, making sure that the decision makers that are looking at those development plans, that are looking at those properties that people want to develop, are also hearing from those that are supportive of it and recognize that we need more housing, and this is a way to do it. And we also need to be thinking about if there are some issues or challenges with development, what are the ways to mitigate that? Don't want to intrude on or infringe on anybody's personal rights or other issues, but certainly there are going to be ways to mitigate that. So let's think through that. Let's work through that together. And again, this is collaborative effort. Hopefully a lot of people really working together to help be that voice and help make sure that it's not just the vocal opposition to housing that is being heard. One of the other challenges that came up was around the regulations, procedures, processes. This again is something that is not unique to Stanislaus County, the cities within Stanislaus County. All jurisdictions need to have their processes, their procedures, their ordinances in place. What we heard from, particularly from development community, was that the development community is not looking for just open, hey, we want to build and do whatever we want, wherever we want. What is needed is consistency in those, and clarity in those different regulations, ordinances, what those are, so that they really understand and know going in what they're getting into, what the requirements are going to be of them, and not have something kind of change along the way, which was among some of the perception that we heard. So again, that clarity and consistency is of utmost importance when we're talking about the regulatory environment and making sure that it is something that is very clear and understood by those who are going through that process, and at the same time is easily interpreted by those that are, I'll call it the staffing on that, to be able to look at those and make sure that it is something that can be interpreted consistently and both over time and across projects. One of the other things that came up in terms of the regulatory environment, issues as well that locals are having to be responsive to what state regulations are, And what does that look like? How does that get applied here locally? And knowing that a lot of times state regulations, California is a very big state, very diverse state across whether it's topography, nature of urban versus rural, a number of other factors that play in. But sometimes those regulations are put into place and it's applicable to all, and it makes it difficult to interpret that or apply those locally. So the layering of regulations could be problematic and challenging as well. So that's something as well that we need to be considering within Stanislaus County is how do we continue to work with the state and the lawmakers at the state level to make sure that as regulations or laws are getting passed, it is something that is applicable and can be implemented here locally. I'll move on to the third item on this list, and again, what are some of the barriers? Limited land options came up, whether it was through developers, heard it frankly from some of the different agency and department staff we heard as well. And that stems from a couple different things when we have limited land options. Probably what we heard about the most, limited land options that are shovel ready, that are ready for development, meaning that they have the infrastructure needed, they have the sewer that is there, it has the sidewalks, the lighting. There might be land that's out there, but it doesn't have those amenities to be able to make it something that a developer can come in and quickly develop on, or develop at a cost that is manageable for them and honestly can be passed along then, because as developers come through, their price points are going to be somewhat based on what they can then sell those homes for, those units for. So it needs to be, with that infrastructure piece, it is very costly, very challenging, and when the land doesn't have that, it makes it unlikely that developers are going to try and move forward with that on their own, because it's just not reasonable for them to create that housing and get it available to the community at a price that can be afforded. One of the other challenges in terms of availability was around just I'll call it the differences between land preservation, agricultural land preservation, and housing development. Something that, again, I think is in a lot of communities that needs to be discussed and needs to be solved and figured out. How do we work through this so that we're using our lands, the land, for instance, it's most appropriate for agriculture, continue to use it. This is something that we heard loud and clear that there's a lot of pride in the ag space and a very important aspect of the economy within Stanislaus County. So need to be very, very mindful of that. But we also want to be mindful of what are the lands that are appropriate for housing. They might not have other really great use, and can we use that land for housing development? So continuing to work with that and work through that in terms of any conflict that might be between those different viewpoints and perspectives on how best to use our available land that we have. The last couple, market conditions and costs. This is one that the development costs, like everything, are going up. The cost of land, the cost of materials, the cost of labor. All of those can force that just ongoing price escalation for housing. There are also things that our local jurisdictions need to do with putting on development fees with those lands. Because quite frankly, when you add additional population, it results in additional needs for services, for infrastructure, for facilities. So there needs to be some offset of that. So there are also the fees that are applied at the local level. But when you put all those together, it does end up creating cost points that make it difficult to construct that housing and make it so it is and remains affordable for our residents that are living in Stanislaus County right now. So we just need to recognize that is one of the challenges, is just the ongoing increasing in costs that are associated with housing development. And prevailing wages, yes. Also something that we heard that ends up, the prevailing wage point will just add to that labor cost and does make it more difficult. So very good comment and point. So I'll get to the final kind of note on this. Overburdened public agency staff. Again, something that we heard, whether it was from development community, public agency staff themselves. A lot of opinions coming in, a lot of viewpoints coming in that there is regular turnover of staff, oftentimes shortages in the staffing that the different agencies and departments have. And that also creates challenges to be able to, one, keep pace with what is coming in. Looking at those applications as they come in, are they getting the review and the support that they need to move them through the system? Also, I discussed earlier about the regulations and making sure that things are interpreted very consistently. Can also have impacts there. Well, all of a sudden you lose some of that historical knowledge, the institutional memories, ends up playing into with new staff coming in, trying to learn new programs, just creates some potential obstacles and slowdowns in that process. The other side of this too, one of the things we'll talk about as we get into solutions, but with the way that staffing is and what's available, oftentimes, these are certainly my words, I'm not putting this on anybody else, but staff are doing all that they can to just stay above water, keep pace with what's in front of them. And really one of the things that I think is needed, and we heard from different stakeholders, having all in Stanislaus County take a very proactive approach to be reaching out to developers, bringing people into the area that we don't have now to expand that capacity. And there just isn't that capacity right now within the existing staffing structures. So again, those are kind of the buckets, big buckets of what we heard about some of those challenges, some of those barriers that we're experiencing, and things that then turn into what are those solutions? You know, what are we going to do about it? How are we going to make that change? And with that, that's where we're going to go next. And I'm going to do a kind of quick check. I didn't see questions going up on any of the comment cards, but I do want to take that moment, take that pause, just make sure we've gone through a fair amount of data, talking about barriers. Would love to see if there are some questions or comments. Let's go ahead and take them. And we have a couple, all right? Okay, we had Gus come around, so he's going to go ahead and bring up some of those. We'll emphasize as some of these questions are coming in. I am not qualified, capable, or able to answer any very specific county or any specific city issues if there are issues there. So this really is about the big picture, Housing Stanislaus, our overall challenges, barriers that we got. So with that as kind of some context setting, Gus, what came in for us?
Testing. Can y'all hear me?
A little bit louder if you can.
How's this?
Good.
Better? Okay, cool. First question is, how do we make sure native or long-standing residents and people in Stanislaus County get the less expensive housing and not those just moving here to get those perks too?
It's one that'll say, love the question. Going to put a caveat on this myself. Again, I'm not a lawyer. Can't say this, but with fair housing laws, et cetera, it does make that ability to just set housing aside for people that have proven their residence for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 50 years. It is something that is not really practical to be able to do that and violates some of that. So again, I say that is not a lawyer, not one that is highly qualified or not extremely expert in fair housing issues, but it is something, a very interesting concept and what we need to be mindful of. But to do that is something that we might not be able to do, but good info to have so we can look at it, research it further, see if there might be some ways around that or make it more applicable to what our population that is currently here is able to access. So really appreciate that question, kind of that mindset that you had and brought to that question.
Next question is there a way to tell how many homes are vacant / on the market as of October 2023?
In terms of the date, the October 2023, there is not anything that I will say I have immediate access to. The data that came up in the slide earlier about vacancy rates, that's coming through U.S. Census, that process, so it is, that is a little bit dated immediately, admittedly. But keeping an eye on that, because that we'll see, and they do the updates, on an annual basis. So I think that's fairly close, but in terms of getting to a very, specific point in time, yes, I'm sure that, from private sector institutions, different firms, there would be some access to that, not something that I have immediately available. But if we can find some ways, and maybe this is one of those long-term things that we consider and talk about, is where can data be made available to the public at large so that you can be that advocate, can have the information that you need to have those conversations. But being able to place that, maybe that's one of those sources we could look for just so you have that real-time information.
Next question. On page 14 of the barriers to housing development is community opposition to housing projects. Why? But they also don't want the homeless. Is there any solution?
Yeah, man, I'm getting all the great questions today. If I have all the answers to these, we would have it all solved. So in terms of the opposition, what we heard anecdotally, I will say, a lot of times that feedback that I don't want development here, it really is geographically based. People that have development going up near their home, they're going to see changes in their traffic patterns, other issues that might come up. So a lot of it is just kind of that geographic based. Again, that's what we hear anecdotally. You talk about bring on that kind of that flip side of that, people that also want to solve for homelessness issues and don't want that, so want more housing, but there's that competing influence. Yes, I agree with that, but we want to make sure, I'll note that with Housing Stanislaus, we're really trying to focus on whether it's workforce housing, market rate housing, affordable housing as well, and bring those along somewhat with a mindset that all additional housing units that we can build are going to be beneficial. Because you add those housing units, people then maybe at something that is in a more affordable price point are able to move up into something else. That opens up the housing that they weren't previously. So just wanted to note that with Housing Stanislaus, we are focused at that, and the strategies that are in Housing Stanislaus focused at that affordable workforce housing, market rate housing end. So again, good question. Sorry I don't have the exact answer or solution with you now. But this is a good opportunity for me again to emphasize that these groups coming together like this is where we need to continue to ask those questions and talk to one another about how can we work together, what can we respectively bring to the table to help make that difference and make that change. So again, really appreciate that question. Thank you.
How are we on time for questions? Still good?
We'll do one more.
Okay.
One more.
So next one is, our main aim is to grow housing options for local residents. What kind of incentives can we provide to local residents in housing purchase process to be more advantageous than non-residents? Like, for example, down payment assistance and other methods.
Again, a great, very specific, I'll call it, tangible suggestion recommendation. Some of what I was hoping would come from some of these questions and being able to provide some recommendations and ideas so that those can be considered. There are, ways you talk about, down payment assistance, other programs. Many of the jurisdictions have some of those programs in place. One of the issues is frankly just the amount of resource that goes into them. How many dollars are available? Is it enough to go around so that everybody that might need it is able to access it? Maybe at this point, no. But that is one that we need to keep in mind in figuring out how can, whether it's through other sources, like maybe there's some state funds that can be drawn down, how do we organize around that as a local geography to make sure that we're maximizing those dollars coming in and that every resource, every dollar that we can access does come in. That is something that we need to do, again, collectively, working together. So again, it really primes that idea of let's make sure that we're all doing our respective part to make sure that all those dollars that are going to be beneficial for our residents are coming to us and being made available to our current residents. So again, really appreciate that question and all the questions. All right. Sorry, I'm just going to call it out. I see a sign. I think I'm seeing it right. We're going to pause for, the clocks actually are showing a little bit different. I'm going to go by this clock and say we will come back at 10:30, but let's take about a 5-minute break. Everybody stretch your legs, and then we'll come back and I'll get going again at 10:30. We ended that last segment, some questions, people talking about, talking about different solutions. Why can we do this? Is it possible to do these different issues? And that's what we're going to get into now is just some of the solutions that came from this. Solutions that are being proposed within the Housing Stanislaus report, again, focused on what are the kind of the high level things that can be done? What are the big strategies that we could be looking at? and it provides a number of examples of different concepts, ways that we could be doing that. It is not necessarily going to be an exhaustive list of everything that can get done. What I really liked about some of those questions that came up at the end of last segment, they were talking about whether it's out-of-the-box thinking, creative ways of doing it. How can we do this? We need all of us to be continuing to move those ideas forward and in figuring out, not kind of coming in with an attitude or mentality of, oh, it can't be done, but instead, why can't it be done? Let's make it happen. So we'll get into some of those solutions. I want to note a couple things, though, before we dive into this next piece. Going back to the questions that are coming in, at the end of, we're not going to get to all the questions. We'll take a handful with each one of our Q&A segments. But we will provide at the end, won't be the end of today, but probably sometime next week, response going out to everybody where we list all the questions that came in, what the answers are to those respectively, so that you will get to see what everybody was asking, what those ideas were, hopefully a very generative document that will come from that. The other piece wanted to note too, I had a couple conversations that some of the, I'll call it the fine print on some of these slides can be difficult to see. So you can do a couple things on the agenda. There is a QR code URL you can go to get access to the slides if it's easier for you to look at on a device that you might have with you. Also noting that all this information also appears in the Housing Stanislaus report that is on your table. So you can kind of follow along through that, and actually there it's stated in more detail than what I'm covering here from stage. So feel free to use any of those if it is you're not able to get a really clear picture on what these on anything that's showing up on any of the slides. So, okay, so let's dive in. As I mentioned, what we've talked about so far, a lot of the data, some of the barriers that we're experiencing, some of the challenges, but what are different strategies that we can use to help move housing forward? How can we create more housing? How can we get the support and the energy behind making housing happen here within Stanislaus County? And I'm going to go through, keep it at fairly high level on these different strategies. Again, you can look in the report, has this information, actually more detailed than what you're going to see on the screen or what I talk about. So again, I'll talk through it at high level about all the different strategies that are there. Two of which we're actually going to go into with our featured speakers coming in to really go into a lot more detail about a couple of the strategies in particular. So very much looking forward to that. The first strategy that is noted within the Housing Stanislaus report is around increasing capacity within public agencies. I talked about the barriers, some of the challenges that are experienced on the staffing side with either shortages, vacancies in staffing, turnover in staffing that happens. So that's one aspect of it, and there are ways that can be addressed. We're actually at the Modesto Junior College campus, have Stanislaus State here locally, but could be partnerships that are being formed and developed with those institutions, high schools, others, just to help expand that pipeline of potential the next generation of people that are going to be filling those public agency spots. Oftentimes, I do in other work, a lot of workforce development type work, and you do the surveying on, for young adults, what careers do they know about? And it's generally 3 or 4 or 5. They know about lawyers or police officers, other things, but there's a whole world out there, and I think kind of expanding those opportunities, you see that introduction can lead to long-term benefits. But that's just kind of one example of a staffing pathway. There's also a lot of opportunity and increased capacity across the jurisdictions by having them partner together, cities and counties, cities and cities. If they have some common needs, common things that they're all working on or needing expertise around, bringing that together, and there's been some good examples of that have happened over the past few years. And one is see that continued because we know that resources are tight at the public agency level. So if there are ways that dollars can be pooled, economies of scale can be achieved, trying to take those steps and being open to that and receptive to that, see if there are ways that capacity can be grown in that front. There are also partnerships with others that are not public institutions, things like the community development corporations. There are opportunity there in ways that they can bring in and access dollars and funds and resources, expertise that aren't accessible through other channels. So making sure to leverage those opportunities, those other organizations that are within our community, and that we're all contributing what we have, what we're best at, to help move, increase the capacity and make sure that housing development can move forward. So I'm going to move to a second strategy that is listed, and that's the continual and ongoing refinement of the policies, procedures, regulations, et cetera. This is something that is already being done at the local levels. Always trying to look at those, do the updates. All of the communities, all the cities, the county, are just wrapping up or have wrapped up their housing element updates. So really great prime opportunity. We're in a good window with some of those new strategy or policies being discussed and put into practice. But it's something that can be done on an ongoing basis. And again, the point here, as I mentioned during the barriers discussion, it's not just about making it as simple to no regulations at all, but really making sure that it's clarity and consistency. Those are the most important factors, and all the different ordinances, all the different policies should be weighed against that and make sure, is this something that is very, very clear for all those that might be seeking to develop housing within our community. I'll move to the next strategy, literally the multi-million-dollar issue, and that's increasing access to capital. There is a strong need within Stanislaus County to increase the investment, have more dollars available, particularly focusing on that workforce, affordable housing side, making sure that there are the resources and from a dollars and cents standpoint coming into our community to support that development. A number of different ways that can be done. There have been, frankly, since the dissolution of the redevelopment agencies, a lot of the strategies that redevelopment agencies were using aren't being implemented, haven't been picked up by other potential sources that could be doing that, whether it's cities or counties or others. Things like using tax increment financing districts. But our opportunities to think creatively about how can we increase revenue and make more revenue and dollars available for the housing need. So opportunities are there. It does take any time, and I appreciated the supervisor's comment this morning, not necessarily advocating, it's going to be additional permit fees or other things. It is a challenging issue. Anytime you talk about costs, fees, taxes, something that none of us want, right? So have to be very mindful and strategic about how that is done. But it is something that can be possible, and doesn't have to be just through taxes and other impact fees, but finding those revenue generating sources. And this is where I'm going to turn it over to our first guest speaker today, and that is Kate Owens from HRA. Apologies, I stumbled over your name. Let me do that again. I'm going to do it in a very smooth fashion this time. I want to introduce Kate Owens from HRA, who's going to be talking about housing trust funds. This is something that a lot of different jurisdictions are using, some in California, throughout the nation. She has a lot of really great experience and expertise with this. So Kate, if I can go ahead and call you up and educate us collectively about housing trust funds, what they are, and what the promise might be for an area like Stanislaus County.
Hi guys, can you all hear me okay? Louder? Okay, I'll talk louder, is that better? I'm taller, I guess. Do that, there we go. Wow, okay. Thank you guys for listening to me this morning. And Alan, great overview to hopefully what I say will kind of slide in nicely. So I have a couple things I want to talk about, just kind of overall, what is a housing trust fund? It's super flexible is the thesis actually. What's happening in California? What are some of your peers doing? Admitting that there probably has to be a fee long-term, sorry. And then administrative structures, like how can we think about and who needs to get involved to make it happen? So let's go. So Housing Trust Funds 101. Okay, this does have a lot of very small font, so sorry about that. What I want you to just notice is they are all over the country. And why did this happen? So we had federal funding that's kind of been not enough for a very long time as the housing crisis has been emerging across the U.S. Our main tool for financing affordable housing has been the low-income housing tax credits. That's capped at the federal level. In California, it's a massive problem because we just don't have enough. LA, San Francisco, and San Jose get most of the resources. So you're seeing communities say, okay, we'll fill in with some gap financing. It's kind of exploded in the last 5 to 10 years. There's also another source of funding from HUD called the Housing Trust Fund. That goes directly to the state of California, and that money pays for specific projects. So is gap financing, we've decided in the state of California it's for very low income housing. And then I want to note, there's a little error on the bottom there. So of the 823 local housing trust funds across the US, there's about $3 billion. So it's a lot of money in sum. It works out to about $12 per person, per community. For you all, that says San Joaquin County instead of Stanislaus. It would be about $6.8 million a year we'd want to get to a pretty reliable source that's on par nationally. Then what do you actually invest in? This is a community conversation, to be frank. The reason everybody wants a housing trust fund is it's very flexible, and you can decide at your own community level what you want to do with it to address exactly the kinds of things that Housing Stanislaus has been working to identify. The kind of big buckets of things that people invest in is single-family home ownership. So, juicing up that down payment assistance program. I worked a couple years ago on the California Dream for All, which is supposed to be a shared equity program at the state level to provide very large down payments, because most down payment assistance programs are only $5,000 to $7,000, which is not enough to really help people. That program went a little too well, and the state spent all of the money in 2 weeks, which is another problem that we can discuss some other time. But the point is that there are lots of nice models out there and ways to think about really helping people with down payment assistance programs, and lots of housing trust funds do that. Another one is permanent supportive housing, which is for people who are unhoused. That has been a huge surge across the state of California. We'll talk about that further. Part of the problem with permanent supportive housing, despite all the funding with Home Key, is long-term funding. So funding that, like operating over the long term, always causes problems, and then we lose the permanent supportive housing. The other big bucket is just big affordable housing, multifamily affordable housing. I saw in your statistics on what's been produced in your community, and you haven't had a lot of multifamily being produced. And the idea is this helps, so you can kind of encourage that. The other big topic is housing preservation. So the idea is taking an existing building and saying, okay, rents can only increase by this much. We need rents to stay at the level that they're at now. That's a good we use that often as an anti-displacement tool. It's really meant for local residents. It sort of starts to answer some of the questions about how do you ensure that the people in the community can stay in the community. Again, Alan was correct that, with fair housing, it's hard to say, you were born here, so you get it. But it's a pretty useful targeted tool, and it's often used through community organizations. So those are kind of the big typologies of what you do. Then the financing instruments. So what can you do? Again, a huge range of opportunities here. So I made this little chart up. I don't know. Hopefully it's helpful. So on one side we have super, super flexible funding, and the other side we have pretty less flexible funding. Every developer, every person is always going to ask for the grant. That's what everybody wants. We like to say in the finance world, you're not leveraging your money. So that just goes out and it sits there. So it doesn't come back in. But it's super flexible, and you can put it into any project you want to, really. A lot of communities choose to do this because it's the piece of the financing stack that's the hardest to put together. So again, the reason housing trust funds are happening is that HUD money is actually not very flexible. And so you need something to say, get over that last 5-10% and make your project go. And so that's what a lot of communities will end up choosing is grants. Probably the most common is really a low interest forgivable loan, or just low interest. I break that up because what happens in the US is we have something called hard pay and soft pay debt. This is kind of nerdery, but let's go for it anyways. The forgivable debt is when you don't have to always pay that back sometimes. So it doesn't leverage as much. So it can often be very long term. We also will split the interest rate up where we say, okay, you got to pay me at least 1%, but 3%, like if you make it, if your project has enough money, pay me 3%. And that's kind of soft pay debt. Or you can just go for below market rate debt. In a community like yours, you'd have to decide where that fits. The last is sort of it's not the most flexible, which is credit guarantees. So the idea here is that you don't actually have to put the gap money into the deal. So you're kind of guaranteeing that the project might need the extra money, or it kind of allows them to get lower. It kind of buys down the interest rate on their senior loan or their pre-development or wherever they are. So that can really help push projects through. So again, for you all, as you think about what is it that you really want to do, you can use any one of these things. But just, I think the least used is really credit guarantees. But it might be what's causing why you've seen the drop in your housing production. Okay, sources of funding. Ugh, no one likes this. So impact fees. Sucks, but it's true. It's what most people are going to use is an impact fee over the long term. You need something, it can't be a one-shot deal. Over the long term, it's really nice to have. Now, we'll get into some communities around you that have used it, and I still hear the mayor say, there's not enough money in my housing trust fund. Okay. The other is local bond measures. Another one that's really, really hard to do, takes a very long time, is not tomorrow. General fund allocations. That's starting to sound easier if we can get people to say, all right, I'm going to take my county general fund, I'm going to take my local general fund, and start to allocate some money. Those are very hard-won dollars, though, so we have to make a decision as a community that you want that. The fourth is charitable and private donations. I think when I start doing housing trust funds, everybody always dreams that this is going to be the biggest source. It's great money, it's wonderful, but also often will come with some specific requirements. I'll give you an example. I structured a housing trust fund with Amazon. Sounds amazing, but they're Amazon. So I had to charge 3% interest, and it has to be under these very specific terms. It can only be for this type of housing. They want to have a lot of involvement. So yes, it sounds amazing, but because it's Amazon, oh, they've got so much money. I got to do $2 billion, but it still wasn't really the easiest money or necessarily reflecting what the community wanted. Okay, so just to give you a sense of what happens, and this is, I don't know why I love bar charts, but I always do. I'm like, can't you see? Now it's in a bar chart. So the gap financing here is just give you an example. Let's say we have a $19 million project, right? Okay, so we can get a permanent loan for about $2 million. That's like the first piece you're gonna go out there and try to get. Then you can get low-income housing tax credits for about $13.8 million. Those in the state of California are incredibly competitive and take a very long time to secure. So that might not actually be your second piece. Sometimes this is actually your last piece because you want to show you're leveraging local dollars. Then because of how housing tax credits work, the developer defers a portion of their fee, and they take that up to 15 years later, so that gives you another $1 million. That still leaves me a gap of like $2.2 million. Even though I've gone and got all these other sources, this is where a housing trust fund comes in and says, okay, I'll take that top money. And that's where this is what we're trying to get to. We're not ever, very unlikely, are we gonna be as big as a LIHTC piece of the stack. We're kind of talking about that last top money that is going to make a project feasible. Woo. Okay, to California. So I told you I really like bar charts. So state and federal funding, let's just kind of look at this. Over time has actually been going down. So we hear lots of stories about, oh, Governor Newsom has put all this new money, housing trust fund, all of these things. Actually, there's still, over time, less and less money available. And we have housing bonds, so that's been an amazing source in California. They're not renewable, they're one-time shots. So California voters have been pretty great about approving state and we're seeing increasingly local bonds to pay for housing. But those are kind of starting to go away over time. State LIHTC is actually lower than it used to be, despite the increasing crisis. And the way HCD is thinking about this, sometimes they're doing a super NOFA where everything's grouped together, so it's harder to be competitive. Federal LIHTC has gone up. That's been useful, and and HUD's block grants have also increased, along with the NHST, which is that National Housing Trust Fund I mentioned on the first slide. So, I think Alan made another point about RDAs disappearing. That's what that state total kind of reflects. Even though the perception will be at the state level, we've just passed another this fund or this facility, we still are behind from where we were when we had RDAs, when there was more local control. Okay, so what are people investing in across the state? This is just a list, and I'm happy to talk to anybody about any of this at any time. But what we're seeing is generally people are investing in low-income housing. There's an increase. Homelessness is more and more something people are focusing on. There's a few communities really focused on moderate income housing, which I think I heard is a motivator here. And then even ADUs, so getting into kind of infill housing, or how do you think about applying some of the legislation that's been passed in the last few years. Here's a couple of regional housing trust funds. I just want to focus on here, you see a big range in how much people have. Orange County obviously has a lot, but you see smaller in some other communities, kind of still a little bit below what we saw as a national average for size of housing trust fund to date. Again, this is just a little bit more detail on the sources of funding. I think I don't need to focus on this too much. We can get into this if you want to, which one would make most sense, or where to go. There's a lot of different ways to think about it. But you really, again, the goal here is to think of something that's longest term and most sustainable, and that is usually impact fee. Across the state, people have used a big range. So look, in the middle, impact fee is actually the least. General fund tends to be something that is used a lot. Again, that's where you see, in some reason, part of the reasons you see a smaller overall allocation. Philanthropy has stepped up across the state. CRA is an opportunity for banks to allocate funding. And then several statewide bonds have really also been very helpful. I'm kind of losing you guys. All right, so 3 examples that might kind of spark your interest here that I want to focus on. One is in Bakersfield, the other's in Sacramento, and the third is in the Bay Area. And they're 3 very different funds. So Bakersfield was established in 2021. They are aiming for about $500,000 a year. It's pretty early to know yet. They did gather together $10 million. They used Measure N, which is a transfer fee. They've also used ARPA money from the feds. They used PLHA, which is a state source, and then some other HCD matching fund. So they've really pulled together a bunch of sources, which is what I want to highlight. I mean, it's one city rather than a county level idea. They're focusing on homelessness, but their charter kind of allows them to go to anything they want, which is a point that's really interesting about housing trust funds. You can kind of change it year to year, which could be good or bad, depending on sort of what your governing board is. In Bakersfield, they kept it entirely within the city. SHRA, which is Sacramento's housing trust fund, represents both the county and the city. They're kind of a unique leftover organization from the RDA period. They have the oldest housing trust fund in the state, and they're kind of lauded across the country as one of the most successful. They put out about $2 million a year. They've put out about $50 million. I think they've funded somewhere between 8,000 or 9,000 units over the last 20 years. They focus just on very low income housing. they have the same they use their county board as their representation on, and like that's how the decisions get made. So it's really at a county level. It allows them to work in unincorporated and incorporated areas of the county as well as the city. But I will tell you, I work with SHRA, and the mayor in Sacramento is constantly complaining that he doesn't have enough money from his housing trust fund. And it's hard because I'm like, well, you have one of the best in the state, if not the country. So that is the reality. It's not going to solve all the problems. It's that top money. So really being clever about how we use it and structure it. And the last is probably the craziest so far, which is in the Bay Area, MTC across all 8 counties has set up a regional fund. They don't yet have any money though. So this was a gamble in some ways. They're aiming for about 15 million a year, 50 million per year, but are trying to get a $10 billion bond passed in the Bay Area. So voters will decide. The reason I bring this one up is interesting, but we don't know if it's actually going to do anything yet because the funding is risky. I'm going to skip through. Oh, here. I'm just going to skip through and say there's a lot of different ways to structure this and think about whether it's something that's across the county, that is just a couple of municipalities getting together, whether, and again, there's precedent across the state. The nice part is if we think about this, we can borrow and discuss with other communities about what makes the most sense for you. And it can be something where you get $1 million, Modesto has $1 million, Mendocino, and that's it, and that's what they've been able to get together, and that's great. They have a start, and now they're able to start raising other sources. Then there's places like the Bay Area that went for this wild, we're going to go for a $20 billion gamble. So the point here is just to say there's a lot of different ways to think about structuring it and putting it together. So super possible is what I'm trying to leave you with. I'm going to stop there. And I guess questions? You want to write them down if you're still awake? Sure. I think we're doing the cards. Yes, they are. These slides are all on the QR code. So, yeah. Or you can, yeah. No worries. Do you want to go? Do you have some questions?
Yeah, while I'm waiting for more questions to roll around, I'll start with this first one I got. How can Proposition 13 be modified to mitigate housing construction costs?
Ooh, that's another, you guys asked the real questions here. I mean, that one, look, if I could go back in time and do away with Prop 13 for all of us, I probably would, but that's just because I'm such a houser. And I think that it's caused problems, though I know a lot of seniors are able to stay in their homes. So changing that requires state level coordination, which is the reason we're stuck with it. So, what we've been able to do for workarounds is additional fees at the local level, because that's what you can make decisions about. So unfortunately, the message is really it requires cooperative behavior across the state and voters getting everybody out to vote for it, to change it, which has been really hard so far. I think there's been a number of ballot measures that just keep failing. Sad.
Next question is, are funds collected by SB2 fees collected by the county clerk via recording fees available for these housing programs?
Absolutely. I mean, they can be, and I think it's a matter of going through and looking at which fees are dedicated and how your community is using them. So it's certainly a source of funding, and I think, again, I said this before, but Stanislaus, it's pretty amazing that you have your county that cares and that is interested and has made it something, because the mandate usually for counties is really just on homelessness and not thinking about the housing problem more broadly. And so then it's kind of left to the individual communities to deal with. But because, all of us are here this morning because the county has some interest, which I think is a huge start. And then kind of having a decision and a community conversation about how you want to use the funding you have. and which fees will apply is exciting because you have interest, which to be honest is often really hard to get.
Next question is, are you hired by the county? If not, why not?
I am not currently working for the county. I'm happy to talk to you all about how I can help some more.
Next one, are there any trusts available for Stanislaus County?
Any housing trust funds is the question. I don't think that there is currently a housing trust fund in any of your municipalities that I know of. Alan, did you come across any?
I believe Modesto has
Started the conversation. Yeah, I've heard that there's rumblings of, but I don't think it's been fully established. I will say what we're seeing that's interesting is more and more in California regional housing trust funds, so where Modesto and the county pool funds together. Then you have to talk about how and who gets what control. Usually the municipalities don't like to give up their dollars. So again, I love that it's starting from a county-wide, because you have more chance of having more power at the state level too, of getting appropriations or kind of leveraging your position with the full county together.
The next one is, can a housing trust fund include a land trust, or is that different?
Another great question. They are different. You can finance land trust projects. Community land trusts are really about taking housing or taking land and having that be permanently affordable housing. So it runs with the actual title of the land, which is a little different than the trust that we're talking about here. They're usually community owned. Sometimes a community land trust is owned by the individuals in the building. Sometimes the mandate of a community land trust is specific to a municipality or to a region. I will say community land trusts are very popular in the state of California right now. I think HCD is supposed to be, there's a program that's supposed to have been launched, I keep waiting for it, to support community land trusts getting established, but generally community land trusts come to housing trust funds for money because it's very hard to put the whole stack together like I showed at some point in my presentation. Is that it?
And last question, will housing trust funds trigger prevailing wages?
Great question. Depends on your source of funding. Yep. So prevailing wages, it's like one of those, for me, intellectual problems where I'm like, yes, I want everyone to have prevailing wages, but then it makes housing really expensive. So it is a conundrum that we grapple with in the state of California. And I will say, it really depends on where that source of funding comes. If it's HUD money, it triggers prevailing wages. If it's a community foundation, if it's Community Reinvestment Act, CRA money, it does not. So it will really depend on the source of funding, but not by definition as a housing trust fund. Thanks, guys.
Kate, thank you very much for sharing with us today. Incredible information, very helpful. And while note one of the things that I'm really interested about with the Housing Trust Fund, I'll say on a more personal front, as Kate described, the flexibility in how it is used, what it is used for, as well as kind of the source of funds. How do you create it? How do you keep those dollars coming in? So a lot of ability for local, the local communities, local jurisdictions to figure out, is this something that can work for us? If so, how? How can it be customized to work for what we need here? So really appreciate that. Thank you for again, the time, the expertise. I'll note, I know we don't get through all the questions. We will be collecting all the questions that come in, providing written response back to those so that you'll get to see all the questions that came in. Kate had also noted that she is available to stay for a little bit after the session today. So if you wanted to just connect with her briefly, please feel free to do so as we wrap up today. But again, really great information that we got specific to the Housing Trust Fund model. And something that now I'll say we collectively, the jurisdictions in particular, is this something that might be something that we want to pursue and think about, and how might this work in Stanislaus County is one of the potential tools for increasing housing development and making it more readily available for all of our residents. So let me go back to, I'm going to actually, unfortunately for you, I shouldn't have even put this slide up. You guys didn't see that, right? Okay. Because we had a break just a little while ago, I'm going to skip over that one. If you do need to get up, if you need to use the restroom, get some snacks, etc., please do so. We want to make sure that you're not legs cramping up, other things. We want to keep everybody moving, but do want to move us forward in agenda as well. And we actually just have a little bit to go going through these strategies before we get to a point of starting to wrap up. One of which being, again, our second featured speaker that we have that I'm really looking forward to talking about missing middle. But before we get there, I wanted to talk about a couple of the other strategies that show up. And again, within your Housing Stanislaus report, these issues are written in there. If you do want these slides, access these slides, there's a QR code at the bottom of your agenda so you can do so, whether that's for your use today or just so that you have after the session today. But going back into these strategies, the next couple really talk about proactive outreach and engagement. Done in two different ways. One for property owners, one for developers. But really taking, as a community, a more proactive approach to make sure that we are reaching out and identifying, in this case, what's on the slide currently is around the property owners, figuring out where are those underutilized properties. Who owns them? Are they interested in development? If so, how do we connect with them? How do we engage them with those who might be willing, the housing developers that might come in and be able to utilize that property? But taking a really proactive approach to that. I mentioned earlier I keep saying that, the different cities in the county have gone through their housing element update or in the process of doing that. Some of that involved helping identify or going out to help identify some of those properties, what might be used for housing development. So we are at an opportune time to know what some of those properties might be. Can we take it to the next level so that it's really trying to have direct communication with those property owners, encourage them, have they considered how using their property for housing development, what might it take, but making sure that it's known in something that they are as property owners able to be part of that solution if it is land that is appropriate for housing use. Taking an active approach, so a lot of times what happens now, they might be sitting on property, don't know if people are interested in having it, but trying to be a conduit, helping make sure that there's some connection being made there. So that's one side of the outreach is to those who have land, those who have property that might be used, and doing so I'll say generally stated, in a more active way than we have been doing in this community as of late. Second is proactive outreach to housing developers. There are not a lot of, I'll call it the organic housing developers here within Stanislaus County. There are housing developers also looking at where are they going to go for those properties, what communities, whether it's a city or a county, are they going to look at, and frequently that's looking for, where they know they have as smooth a process as possible. I talked earlier about the consistency and clarity in any policies and regulations. But they also need to know, are jurisdictions interested in housing? Do they want it? So taking that active approach, figuring out do we have a comprehensive list of housing developers that are in California that are looking to build? If so, how are we communicating with them? How are we sharing information about opportunities that do exist? But taking those steps very deliberately, very actively, very strategically, so it's not just kind of by the happenstance, a developer got connected with a property and, oh, okay, we'll go ahead and build. But really taking that approach to make sure that we're out there reaching out to them, letting them know that we want development, here are the opportunities that can exist. How can we get you to come to our community? And do so it is, again, we want to make sure that as housing development is attracted, it's done for the benefit of all. It is helpful for those who need housing, the existing communities, the existing residents, and that no one is getting taken advantage of through that process. But nonetheless, making sure that we are being active in the way that we're approaching those developers and attracting them to Stanislaus County for housing development so that we can expand that capacity, potentially expand the scale with which we're developing housing. So again, that would be a somewhat different approach than what we typically have been seeing here within Stanislaus County, but could be effective, and it is one that I'll go ahead and say, competitive market. Everybody knows in California, housing supply is short everywhere. So it is something that, with that said, developers are going to go where they have, the best path, most likely path for approval, and able to do the kind of the development that they want. So we just need to be aware of that, and again, and be strategic in the way that we're reaching out and bringing them into the community. Next strategy I'll be talking about, fostering the development of a variety of housing types. As we looked at data, we talked about housing within Stanislaus County really is dominated by single-family homes. Not a lot of either smaller apartment units, townhomes, small condominium areas, duplexes, those types of homes that might be accessible, affordable for a variety of different family types, different households. So really looking to create that variety so that it's meeting the needs of all of our residents. Again, regardless of, could be multi-generational housing that we are needing. It could be whether it's about housing size or people with disabilities, but a lot of different types of housing needs that exist. We want to make sure that there are housing options available regardless of what people are looking for. And again, a lot of different ways that can be done. You see on the slide some ideas about the different policies and strategies for allowing for increased density of housing. Might be about prioritizing and designating opportunity sites and prioritizing a specific kind of housing development within those areas. But different models that we can use, different strategies we can use. But this is another one that we are very fortunate today to be joined by Mitali Ganguly from Opticos Design, who's going to be talking to us about missing middle housing, what that is, what it's looked like in other communities, what the strategies have been to help bring that in, bring that type of development into into different counties and different communities. So really fortunate to be joined by her today. So Mitali, if I can go ahead and have you come to the stage. And again, this is a great opportunity to really learn and for us to really figure out, is this something, how can we do this here locally? What are the strategies that we might implement? And I will note for you as well, just keypad to move through. Down or right. Yeah.
Right.
Thank you.
All right, thank you for that, Alan. And can you all hear me okay? Is this too loud? Don't want to be shouting? It's all good? Okay, all right, thank you. So again, we've had two excellent speakers. It's a tough act to follow, but I'm going to try my best. So let's just jump right into a topic that I'm almost like an evangelist about. I really care about this topic, and I hope to enthuse some of the crowd on this topic as well. So what is missing middle housing? And I'm going to break up my talk trying to cover some of these big picture topics, what it is, why we need it, some strategies and examples of how it's being applied in different places, what can be potential barriers, and also what are best practices for all of us to follow. So to start us off, what is missing middle housing? Increasingly we're hearing this term in a lot of the media, in the press. It's being covered by different groups, and people actually use the term differently. It gets confused with what is like middle income housing. It gets confused with what is financing of a certain kind. So just to kind of establish what we mean by missing middle housing, I'm just going to define it. So we like to call it house-scale buildings with multiple units in walkable neighborhoods. And all these three things are important. It is multifamily, but it's not the conventional multifamily which we think of in terms of large mid-rise or mixed-use buildings. At the same time, it's not a single-family house either. It's something in between. And these are middle in two different ways, which is why at times it gets confusing. They are essentially house-scale buildings. In other words, they create a middle form in terms of height and scale and the way the building looks and feels between a classic single-family home, like single-unit buildings, and multi-unit buildings. So that's where it comes in the middle. And also, they can deliver attainable housing choices for middle-income households. Due to their inherent characteristics, missing middle is, it's not like a high-end product. So its entire intent is to provide more attainable housing for middle-income households. So that's why we believe that this can be part of the housing affordability solution. This is a problem that's not just localized to the Bay Area or, even to California. It's a national problem now. So as we think about what are the potential solutions to trying to bridge this gap, missing middle is definitely something to consider as one of the tools in our palette. So the reason why I say that this is one of the lower hanging fruits that more and more jurisdictions should try and adopt is because these are smaller units with simpler construction techniques, they can be lower cost to build and they can be built in an incremental manner, which makes these a very flexible type of housing product to apply in cities and towns of all sizes. So here are some of the characteristics, I would say, some of the defining features that make missing middle different from just every kind of multi-unit development. These consist of smaller but well-designed units in house-scale buildings. And by that I mean that a lot of thought has been put into developing the internal layouts, which is why these building types have inherent heights and widths and depths, which make them fit very well into residential environments. But at the same time, these are very efficient. And that is the story behind why these are more kind of cost effective to produce. They feature a little amount of private open space, but there is a lot of stress on shared open spaces, which also help to build a sense of community. They support walkable environments because, again, the focus is not on providing a large number of parking spaces. So what that does mean is that they work best. Missing middle works best in areas that are currently walkable. And by that I mean they have some access to transit, to basic services, to schools, to jobs and other amenities. And in turn, they also help reinforce these kind of environments. So the two kind of go hand in hand and kind of build up each other. And overall, as we're thinking about the growing demand for walkability, missing middle is one of the solutions that can also contribute to enhancing that as a feature of most of our cities. And as stated before, just because they include a range of different housing types, they can accommodate a wide range of lifestyles and household choices as well. And we'll discuss all of this in a little bit more detail as well. Here are some visuals, because that was a lot of text. But in the visuals, you can see some of these points that I just talked about. You can see there's an example of a cottage court, a duplex, a fourplex, and some other very typical missing middle types. And each of them have some degree of shared open space. They look and feel like a house. Typically, there's always an entrance from the sidewalk or from the front of the building. So as you can see, these are multifamily buildings, but they look and feel and behave differently than the classic, say, a double-loaded corridor, 4-story tall multifamily building, which is another type which is important, but which is different from missing middle. Here are some typical types, and in all traditional cities and in downtowns of all cities which were built in the early 1900s and before, we do see missing middle types. Some of the common types are duplexes, and these are either side by side or stacked. We have small cottage courts, courtyard buildings, multiplexes, both big, small, and medium in size, triplexes, fourplexes, and townhouses. So a question that we're often asked is why the term missing middle? Why are they called missing? And missing is simply because of a large number of reasons. That'll take, how much time do you have to discuss all the reasons that went into it? But because of a whole host of reasons, for the last 20, 30, 40 years, less than 10% of all housing units that are traditionally produced have been missing middle. And here you see the numbers between 1990 to 2013. I assure you the situation hasn't changed. The graph could possibly look worse. I just don't have the numbers for 2023. But this is the state of missing middle housing as a place within the larger housing spectrum that is delivered. And these types, traditionally, before, frankly, the advent of modern zoning in full force, these used to be an integral part of all towns and cities, traditionally in downtowns or on the edges of downtowns, providing attainable and affordable housing options for workers. But again, due to a number of reasons, these have stopped being produced at the scale that we knew that they could be produced at a point of time. And what you see on the slide right now is literally a photo from a Sears and Roebuck catalog. So this is from the 30s, and there used to be a time when you could literally order a missing middle type in the mail, and it would come, and people had figured out a way to produce these cheaply and efficiently, and right down to the point that they were customized to typical existing lot sizes, like lot widths and lot depths in many cities and towns. So this was like a very achievable product for people to just order one in the mail, literally. And maybe now is the time for us to rethink how to make this happen, given the state of housing unaffordability that we're all struggling with. So as Alan pointed out in his very kind of methodical presentation of the state of housing in Stanislaus County, 80% of all housing units are single-family homes. And you can see this graph is like literally it looks pretty disproportionate to me. And the next most common type is also not missing middle. These are kind of slightly larger multi-unit buildings with 20 units or more. And the next percentage is 6%. So, where is missing middle? It's like literally missing in this scenario. And this situation is typical of most cities, not just in Stanislaus County or in the Bay Area or even in California. This is a pattern that we see repeated everywhere. But thankfully, slowly things are starting to change. So moving on to the next topic, now that I kind of hopefully establish what we mean by missing middle, why do we need it? And I would say there are many good reasons, but let's just focus on what I feel are my top 4 to respond to changing housing needs. And we'll just take a look at some more information on this. To increase housing attainability and home ownership, 2 very key things towards building generational wealth. To also strengthen local economies and to promote sustainable development. So first of all, let's look at national demographics. Now, none of these numbers are a surprise, I think. Most of us are aware that increasingly the US is it's changing. Our demographics are changing, our household types are changing. Today, 30% of all US households consist of just one person, and these figures are expected to increase. Also, we are an aging population. By 2030, it's predicted, or at least it's forecasted, that 1 in every 5 Americans will be over the age of 65. Also, increasingly, people are having fewer children. So there are some estimates that say within literally a few more years, 75% of US households will not have children. But at the same time, what is the housing market producing? Primarily a single-family home, 2-bedroom or 3-bedroom or even 4-bedroom in size, as if the conventional family of the 1940s and 50s is still the dominant household type today. If like there's a mom and dad and 2 kids and a dog, but that's not reality. That's not what our demographic shifts are showing us. So most communities today are not well equipped to meet these demographic shifts, which is why, again, the case for adding missing middle housing to the entire palette of housing types that we have in our communities. Also, Alan talked about housing unaffordability. This is something which is front and center, not just for decision makers, not just for city leadership, but for the average person on the street. And I'll quickly go through the numbers. You can see that the numbers above are for the country as a whole, and the numbers below are those for renters and homeowners in Stanislaus County. And this fact that that a disproportionately large number of people are house burdened, it has a rippling effect on many other things. It leads to, again, fewer savings. It leads to more problems when people age and they have to move out. People cannot build enough wealth to pass on to their children. So there is like a rippling effect which is caused when people have to spend more than what is a justifiable amount on housing compared to other costs. And again, this in turn reinforces housing inequity. And in this, we see that in 2019, the average wealth of a white household in the country was almost like $1 million more than that of an average black household. So we know that there are many factors that go into it, but housing has, again, traditionally been a way to build generational wealth. So, and there have been practices such as redlining and race-based zoning that we know have deprived equal housing opportunity to many, many groups in the country. So through missing middle housing, we have an opportunity to try and again make homeownership, especially entry-level homeownership, more achievable and attainable for larger groups of people. There's also, thinking about it from the market side, increasingly more surveys and research is showing that there's a growing demand for walkability. Not everyone wants to have to drive everywhere. Now, by this, I don't mean that people will stop owning cars. You may still own a car. You may use it a few times a week. But increasingly, we're finding that people want to have the option that if they want, they can walk somewhere, they can bike somewhere, they can carry out some of their daily needs, some of their daily chores without needing to drive to each and every place. And so this demand for walkability and this demand for mixed-use walkable environments is further reinforced by missing middle housing. In Stanislaus County, there's obviously the RENA figure, which is all important. And we know that a certain number of housing units need to be produced. And you can see it's 34,000 new housing units between now and 2031. And this is a big number, and especially when we calibrate it against the numbers that Alan shared earlier of what has actually been the housing production. So if we have to meet this need at different income levels, then we cannot just rely on single-family homes. We cannot just rely on either grant-funded or other sources of larger multifamily developments. Just to add more housing potential, we need to definitely include and consider missing middle housing as part of the solution. So in summary, what can missing middle housing do? It can support diverse housing needs, as we saw, the needs of 1 to 2 person households, multi-generational families, other unusual arrangements which are becoming quite popular, such as co-living and shared housing. It can increase rental options. It can enable a family to move into a neighborhood with a rental product, which otherwise they would be priced out of if the only option were for them to buy a single family home in that neighborhood. So it increases, it gets people onto that ladder of, first of all, getting in a neighborhood where they want to live, and eventually being able to buy maybe a small starter home, then maybe a larger home, but it just makes that process at least slightly feasible for many, many groups in the country, not just in Stanislaus County, but all over the country. It also enables some other trends that we're finding are going to become more and more reinforced in our population, which are of aging in place, of downsizing. And as we have an aging population, there's the associated issue of how are they going to afford to continue to live happy, healthy lives for longer, given the state of Social Security and everything else. So this may not be instantly intuitive, but in many cases we're finding that missing middle housing, including options such as an ADU, are being used by aging seniors to provide passive income. Also, when we talk about missing middle, by and large, we're not talking about large developments. We're talking about small-scale infill within cities, within existing developed areas, and this in turn can support local businesses and developers. One thing to note is that often we get this criticism that you want to promote more missing middle, and who's going to benefit? It's going to be the person from the Bay Area, your tech developer who has like a couple of million to spare and they're just buying up real estate. The truth is that missing middle is often not the kind of housing that attracts a lot of outside investment, because these are smaller, these are generally they are multi-unit, but they're generally rental products, or at least in most types. So inherently, these are better suited for like middle-income families, not essentially for someone as an investment property. And also, oftentimes, large developers of residential properties, such as a classic townhouse developer, or you have your GB homes, or share properties and all these larger firms, they're not really interested in missing middle, because their numbers, it's not just like the same floor plan done 500 times. So in a converse way, in one way, it makes missing middle slightly more difficult to mass produce. But on the flip side, it also opens up many more opportunities for local developers, for homegrown development to happen and for people to invest or reinvest in their local economies. It also promotes inherently, because of the way these types work and the contexts in which they function best, it promotes compact, walkable, and also lower carbon communities. Now, this is important, especially in communities such as the Central Valley, where ag is all important. We need to preserve as much of ag land as we can. And the solution is not to kind of keep sprawling out, but to be able to intensify and make the best use of the developed infrastructure provision that we have within our cities and towns. So how do we apply missing middle? And there are two fundamental ways of doing this. The default is in the form of what we call incremental infill, that these are kind of small scale like moves to kind of get like one lot or a few lots developed at a time, and which is why this inherent flexibility is one of the attributes that make missing middle a very solid strategy to adopt, is that it doesn't need a large influx of funds or some massive effort on the part of decision makers or developers for this to happen. It's not a big development. It can be, but by and large, it's small scale. It can happen over time. It can be incremental, and it can also be done by local residents, local developers, in addition to being funded by other agencies. So some of the popular types are conversions, additions, remodels within residential neighborhoods, and it can also be adding housing to existing underutilized commercial and similar properties in an effort to make them mixed use. So we look at a few examples of all of this. So in these graphics, I know the colors are a bit faded, but if you can squint, I guess, you can make out that the buildings which are kind of yellow with like the red roofs, so those are the missing middle types, and the rest are just conventional single-family homes. So the takeaway from this slide is that you can insert missing middle types into most existing residential neighborhoods without a drastic change in character. Now we can kind of find the nuances within this of exactly which type works best where, but the takeaway is that these form good neighbors to existing single-family homes in residential neighborhoods, which is why, we heard a little bit about community opposition. We find that when you're talking about missing middle, and once a community fully understands what we mean by missing middle, generally, in my experience, the opposition has been a bit low. Because no one really wants, if you have like a single-story, like a single-family home, it's understandable that you would not want like a 4 or 5-story building right next to you. But at the same time, you may be a bit more receptive to having a 2.5-story building, which is still multi-unit. But it's not, it's still at least within the realms of form and scale that make it feel like part of the same residential neighborhood. So here's, again, just a close-up of that graphic. As you can see, in an incremental manner, in like a very kind of sensitive and a gentle way of doing infill, missing middle housing types look like maybe just slightly larger single-family homes, and they can blend into residential neighborhoods. But of course, certain kinds of missing middle types, which are slightly taller, slightly larger, they can also be used to create main streets within existing neighborhoods, or even smaller mixed-use centers, which are again important towards promoting walkability and of providing more amenities and services for the existing and new residents. Here is an example of a renovation. This is an example that a colleague of mine worked on from Portland, Oregon, in which you had a large 2-story single-family home that was going to get demolished, but instead it's been refurbished into a 4-plex. So the developer made a fairly decent profit. We reinvested in our existing housing stock, and we came up with 4 attainable housing options in place of a single-family home which no one could have afforded. So this is an example of how a renovation can happen and just promote more incremental infill with missing middle. And a more typical strategy that we see applied everywhere is of, again, additions to existing homes. So this is a classic 3-step situation that we can consider. So you have a single-unit home with a detached garage in a neighborhood with other single-family homes with detached garages, but due to a variety of reasons, an ADU can be added maybe in the space between the primary home and the garage. This could be maybe to house extended family, that you have family moving in, or you have an aging parent who you want to kind of keep with you, but not exactly in the same house. So in that case, an ADU is a great solution. An ADU would have a separate entrance and access to open space. So each of the individual families have their own private existence, but you're right next to each other, and you can help out or just be as close to each other as you choose. Over time, which you see in step 3, another smaller unit can be added above the garage, like a carriage unit. So this could be maybe to house your child who's at college and who comes back and wants to move in for some time. It could be for additional income. So this is just an example of how missing middle types can work to serve needs of not just different household types, but maybe even for the same household type at different stages of as at different stages of their lives, like as the family changes, as their needs change, how missing middle can help with that. Here's like another example of a multi-generational house, which is similar to what I just showed. And we're increasingly finding that many communities are receptive to the idea of having like 2, at times even 3 generations living in the same house. But again, everyone wants their own space. So this can be a solution of how to provide that privacy, but also proximity, and everyone kind of interacting on their own terms. And from the street, for the neighbor, this looks and feels like a single family house. So it doesn't feel like something alien has landed in your neighborhood when you consider a missing middle type such as this. Also, to carry on the conversation of how missing middle can be flexible, this is an example from Santa Maria, and this is a project that the firm where I work, Opticos Design, we worked on. Santa Maria is a community where you have very little available housing, and which is also the work center for many surrounding neighborhoods and for many surrounding cities. So a lot of people would drive like 2-3 hours to come to Santa Maria to work. This project was done in coordination with a social services group based in Guadalupe, and which is, again, about half an hour away from Santa Maria. So this is workforce housing. These are all a bunch of really small units, only 350 square feet each. But from the outside, it still fits in well within the residential neighborhood. It's on a corner lot, and it doesn't have, obviously, that many parking spaces because of its location. But it provides housing for people who would otherwise be commuting long distances without completely disrupting that residential look and feel of the neighborhood. In this case, you can see there are 20 units on a corner lot. The lot is really small. It's just 80 feet by 72 feet. But at the same time, it looks and behaves in a manner that is fairly compatible with the adjacent single-family homes. Also, very popular types that we see, that people really gravitate towards are cottage courts or like pocket neighborhoods. And these are individual either cottages, or it can be duplexes, or it can be fourplexes clustered around some shared open spaces. So you kind of give up your individual front yard, or like at least a large front yard. You exchange that for a sense of community and more shared spaces, at times even shared kitchens and community halls. But this is another model for how to kind of get like missing middle in the form of smaller cottages and smaller single-family type houses in larger parcels or in vacant parcels within cities. There's also an application along commercial and along corridors that we see. And this is an example that I'll share from Modesto. And this phenomenon is seen like all over, right? That you have either like shopping centers or strip malls in which some of the businesses are doing fine, but by and large, we have like parking spaces which are vacant for most of the year and which are not even fully filled out at Thanksgiving, which used to be the metric by which these were designed. So what can happen? For this particular case, we looked at the surrounding context. We tried to select all the different housing types that would be appropriate from within the palette of missing middle housing types. And then we came up with a short-term and a long-term solution. So what you can see, and this is along McHenry Avenue and Bowen Avenue in Modesto, if anyone's interested in the exact location. But in this case, you can see that anything from 99 to 359 units could be accommodated in a way that doesn't feel like a big building has landed right on this corridor. In some cases, if a commercial use is working well, it can be retained. In some cases, if it's a dying use, then over time it can be replaced. But essentially, again, with just a combination of different missing middle types, we can extend that residential fabric to fill in these larger pockets of either vacant or underutilized parcels in primely located areas of the city. And this is what it looks like. I mean, hopefully it'll get built someday, but this is just a rendering that shows you, like at the pedestrian scale or at the human scale, the fact that these are buildings that contribute, to a sense of community, that these often are designed with certain criteria, such as, the front doors facing the street, of having parking at the rear, and other such built form criteria that contribute to making these feel as if it's an extension of the existing neighborhood and not like a community that has turned its back to what was existing there already. Also, it doesn't mean that since we talked about this incremental approach, that missing middle types are not, they're not viable for larger scale development. And I'll just show you a couple of examples. You can insert missing middle types into other more conventional residential developments. So for example, here we have the Muse concept, which is a kind of missing middle type of like a townhouse turned on its side with like a pedestrian connection in between. This was inserted, there's a project from Daybreak in Utah, and this was inserted in to fill in what was an extra wide lot in the middle. So what this looks like is this. I mean, right now you don't see people over here, but again, it's creating smaller, more attainable homes for people and creating a sense of community, of promoting pedestrian movement and access, but at the same time also filling up with missing middle what would otherwise just have been leftover space because it wasn't big enough or sized correctly enough for single family homes. Another example is, this is a Prairie Queen is the name of this neighborhood. It's a 100% missing middle housing neighborhood in Nebraska. And this is attracted a lot of interest. It's built over 50 acres. You have a variety of unit sizes and different building types. But on the ground, as you look at it, it looks, I mean, of course, the architectural style is not what we would typically use in California. But as you can see, there is not one single building in this entire 50 acres which is only single family. Each of these are a missing middle type, but they are mixed in a way to kind of create interest, to not look completely cookie cutter, and they are solving, they all have within them units of different sizes. Here's another visual of this particular unit has 12 units within it. From the outside, this may not be readily apparent, but you can disguise a lot of density using missing middle types. Another example is of cul-de-sac, which is like a misnomer in a way. This is a 16-acre development under construction right now near Mesa. It is in Tempe, so it's on a light rail line, and it has 0 resident parking. All of it is accessed. Here are some visuals. It's all based on a sort of courtyard typology with a variety of missing middle types, again, having a wide variety of unit sizes, but all of it is to promote this pedestrian scale environment. And contrary to all initial expectations, everything has been sold out way before the developer or the investors predicted it would. So in other words, there is a demand for this kind of living. Oftentimes our instant reaction is that, oh, it's never going to work here. But there are enough examples now to show that missing middle is a growing concept and is gaining traction in many of our cities. And I'll say if it can happen in Tempe, it can definitely happen here. So I may need to skip over this portion of potential barriers. This was mainly, I can suffice to say that there are all kinds of barriers. And this is just because this is a type that has been ignored for the last 30 or 40 years. And you can read some of the primary ones on the screen. It is not easily classifiable by industry standards, which in turn means that some of the codes are not correctly described for missing middle types. It is lumped in with all other larger multi-unit buildings, which creates issues. There are also planning and zoning barriers, at times even inadvertent barriers. So we can discuss that maybe if we have Q&A and if time permits. But generally, I'll just kind of skip through this section to keep to time. But overall, let's just summarize with some best practices. So I would say, since we have a mix of different groups here, there are some who are decision makers, some who are planners, some who are kind of city leadership. I would say that these are the best practices that we're finding increasingly, as a takeaway from this entire presentation. It is to update standards to recognize missing middle as different from conventional multifamily building. These are house-scale multifamily, which is inherently different from your high-rise or mid-rise construction. So the economies are different, the criteria are different, and once we just look at the requirements and the standards for missing middle from that lens, a lot of the barriers automatically fall away. So for example, regulating not by density NFAR, but by the maximum building envelope. Not trying to keep like minimum lot sizes, but instead of controlling the size of the building that goes on a lot. So there are some of these kind of common sense measures that can go a long way in just making missing middle part of our housing solution. And this is just a summary, it's my last slide. What are other cities doing to promote missing middle housing? And over the last 4 or 5 years, we've seen an explosion of interest, literally. Like, the term missing middle housing was coined by Dan Perolic, like who I work with over 20 years ago. But there's been heightened interest over just the last 3 or 4 years, I would say. And we're finding a whole variety of different instruments and strategies being used nationwide to try and get more missing middle built. So these are in the form of housing plans or missing middle plans, studies and scans, just to figure out where missing middle housing can work best in cities. And we've carried out a number of such studies. You can see some of the cities that are listed down below. Also, you have missing middle zoning toolkits, which can be applied in the form of different levels of standards and objective design standards. This all ties into something that Alan also talked about, which is about streamlining and making things more predictable, which will automatically attract more developer interest. So these are all strategies that tie into that aspect of missing middle. You are also having like more and more cities adopting pre-approved plans, learning, taking a page from the way ADUs have become such a popular housing solution just because it was easier to produce and build. And also, you can see that there are other slightly more nuanced studies and strategies, such as what we call missing middle scans and deep dives. So these are, again, looking at a community, figuring out where missing middle can go best, and also figuring out what needs to change in terms of standards and policies to enable this to happen. So that's what I had. If I exceeded my time, apologies, Alan, and thank you. I'll be happy to take any questions. Mm-hmm. No, of course.
So the first question is, in addition to corner stores, how can missing middle housing best integrate to... I'll get back to that one. Okay, I'll get back to that one. Next one. The main problem can be parking solutions in low-density areas. How do you change the mindset of local residents who see mostly multifamily mixed neighborhoods for the homeless community only in the Central Valley?
Got it. I'll talk about the parking solution. This is obviously something that we hear about a lot. And I will say parking is important, but when parking starts to dominate the conversation over providing housing, then we need to rethink our parking standards. But our strategy, and this is how, I can only speak on the basis of my experience working on these projects at Opticos. Our strategy is, first of all, to understand which areas can support missing middle housing. This is not you can put missing middle housing anywhere, why not? But the smart thing to do is to put it where the requirement for every house to have 4 cars is not there. So it would be optimal to introduce missing middle housing in places where people have at least an option to driving. If you take a rural area where, honestly, there is like zero transit, you need to drive to even go get milk, then imagining that a 4-plex will work just as well with not enough housing and not enough parking associated with it, that's not realistic. So the idea is missing middle can work in many different environments, but it needs to be supported by at least some degree of transit, by having some access to amenities and services. And again, you can say that one thing leads to the other as well. So if you're building up a development from scratch, then obviously include missing middle so that it can create that population, in one intensity to be able to afford services and amenities in the future. But I would say as a holistic solution, it needs to go where it'll work best. It needs to be in areas that are at least slightly transit and amenity supported, and it in turn is going to reinforce those walkable characteristics. In terms of the homelessness situation, that's again, by missing middle, of course, it can be a solution for many different things, but we are talking about what we call housing mainly targeted towards the middle income. So it is not inherently subsidized. Missing middle is naturally affordable, or at least attainable. That's how we kind of differentiate between the capital A affordable, which is with the subsidy, and not, because these are smaller units, these are simpler construction, these are not like your 3,000 square foot unit homes. So they serve that middle income group within our the different housing markets. So it can be a solution for like homelessness and for kind of even temporary housing. There have been examples of that, but the default application of missing middle is actually not for that. So that's why I say it's part of the solution. We need housing of all kinds, but this helps bridge some of that gap which is often left behind because it doesn't have a subsidy associated with it, and it's also not in the top tier of the housing market.
Thank you. The next question is, for mixed middle housing, wouldn't the development focus be on a whole block or one unit by one unit?
I would say both work. As we saw in some of these examples, it can be done at the level of an individual lot. I'm working on a project in Sacramento right now in which we're even pushing the boundary towards taking some experimenting. I mean, none of this is final yet, but actually seeing how to make small lot home ownership more viable by, like, instead of doing lot consolidation, there are these larger lots in which a cottage court is being developed at the rear of the lot, but those individual small 1,200 square foot lots can actually be sold off. So in a way, you're kind of promoting entry-level home ownership. So it can work at an individual level, on like one lot or even on a couple of lots. But as we saw, you can even have new developments, either infill or greenfield, that can include missing middle types as part of the palette of different housing types that you would offer. They're completely flexible, and you have a wide range of housing types that can gain application in different types of environments.
Thank you. The next question is, are we taking resources like water supply, sewage capacity, et cetera, into account?
Yes. So that is part of the reason why, again, missing middle works best in infill conditions, because, again, if we need to expand outside our jurisdictional boundaries, that is a different discussion. But primarily, we need to make the best use of our infill lots and our vacant lots and our underutilized lots. And missing middle is a great solution for that because it fits in, it blends in well, and in areas where you have existing infrastructure are kind of the low-hanging fruit for introducing missing middle.
Thank you. And the next question is, have we looked at the issue of nonprofit developers? It doesn't seem that there are many in Stanislaus County.
I'm not sure I'm best equipped to answer that, but maybe Alan can help. But, this is, again, we see all varieties of public-private partnerships in getting some of these projects built. So the city at times gives land, and at times you have nonprofits who take care of the actual construction. So I don't know. Alan, do you have something to share on that?
I'm going to springboard off of that into the final closeout here. So let me first say, before I get into that question, sorry. Matali, thank you very much for being with us today to share this news, this information. Terrific, both kind of the description of what it is, how it works, where it's been successful. I know, being a very visual person, great to see on the screen too, kind of the mock-ups of what it might look like. It makes it very real, very tangible. I don't think I'm probably the only one in the room that helps. It's one thing to kind of talk in theory about something, to actually see, I think it's incredibly helpful. So really a lot of rich, great information, something that, as we talked about, not a lot of diversity in housing within Stanislaus currently. So this is something, a new model, new idea to consider, and could be a great potential solution for what we're doing here in Stanislaus County. So thank you again. Thank you very much. Okay, so the question about the nonprofit group, what I was going to say in terms of kind of springboarding off of that, I'm going to be calling up Jody Hayes, County Executive, in just a moment to kind of provide some closing comments for us today. But what is important to note in terms of whether it's nonprofit developers, others, this is, and I've said it a few times today, this is a collective issue. We need everybody bringing forward what resources, what capacities they have, helping make sure that we're leveraging all of those opportunities. If we don't have sufficient capacity, we're identifying what can be done to help us bring in, whether it's additional nonprofit developers or for-profit developers, but need to have those critical conversations and continue that forward, because that's how change is going to be made. The status quo that we've seen is not going to change if we're not active about it. And that is a lot of times the cities, the county, and housing developers are the front line on housing development. But it really does take a community-wide effort to get that out, to get that information out there, get that spirit out there amongst our residents that we do need more housing development, hear ways that we can do it, and we need to support that and encourage that. So that's what I'd say before, as I'm about to introduce and bring up Jody Hayes. We need to continue to work on this together. Today was an opportunity for us to present and share with you the Housing Stanislaus findings, the report, some strategies and recommendations that we're encouraging others to follow. It is very intentionally by design, the recommendations included. We're open, and we know that it's not going to appeal. Not every recommendation is going to appeal to every community, to every individual. But we hope that there is the variety in there that everyone can find a place that does fit for what they want, for what they think their community needs, for both the kind of the culture and the makeup of what the communities are. So want to have some of that variety and that opportunity for us to really work together and find the solutions that are going to work for each individual area, and not trying to be, I'll call it, dictating of here's exactly how it's done, but rather present those options so that all the different groups, all the different organizations that are involved in housing development can find what's going to work best for them and help move that forward. I'm going to go ahead, Jody, call you up to stage. So I'm very happy to be able to introduce Jody Hayes, the county executive, who's going to close us out today. So Jody, thanks for, one, leadership on the Housing Stanislaus effort, and two, being here today.
Thank you. Thank you so much. All right. Usually you can hear me pretty well, so if I need to speak up, I'm just going to grab this thing anyway. First of all, I just want to acknowledge and thank every single person who spent their Saturday with us having this conversation this morning. Housing is a very, very top issue in our community, and I want to talk about what our intent was here, but I want to first start by just thanking all of you for spending half of your Saturday with us here today. And I particularly want to thank a few individuals, and I want to recognize that we have some of our city council representatives who joined us here this morning, and I want to thank and appreciate Supervisor Manny Graywall for kicking this off for us on behalf of the County Board of Supervisors. Manny did have another engagement that he needed to get to, but he did commit to being here this morning, and I thought he showed up and did a great job for us this morning. But I also want to thank Rosalinda Vieira here from the City of Ceres. Thank you so much for being with us from the Ceres City Council. She didn't know I was going to do that. I caught her off guard. And I want to thank two of our colleagues on the Modesto City Council, David Wright and Jeremiah Williams. I will tell you, I've had offline conversations with both of them this morning. In addition to just being here and learning like the rest of us and so forth, they've actually both been personally involved in trying to advance specific projects in the community and trying to literally use their own platforms in their public and private lives to try to improve our housing situation. And I thank you both very, very much for being here with us, but also for what you do when you're not in rooms like this. So thank you so much. I firmly believe that government does its best work when we're, I'm sorry, did I miss somebody else? Oh, Rachel Hernandez is here from the City of Riverbank. I'm so sorry, I didn't even see you, and I apologize. Rachel Hernandez for the City of Riverbank. Thank you. And thank you, Erica, for waving me down. I should pause. Did I miss anyone else? I'm so sorry, Rachel. Thank you so much for being here. And I'm sorry we didn't get a chance to connect on the break, or I would have not missed that introduction. I firmly believe government does its best job when we're working on the future. And of course, who serve in government service have vital roles on a given day. We have to fill potholes and help support law enforcement services and all of those things that anybody might call out on a given day. But I believe our best work is when we're spending our time trying to shape what the community looks like a decade from now or 2 decades from now. Because if we're not doing that, then whatever we look like 10 or 20 years from now is just going to be whatever spills over the Altamont Pass and comes this direction. And particularly for our valley communities, we need to define ourselves. And so for me, Housing Stanislaus was very much in that spirit of what can we do to try to build the trajectory of the future that we would like for the valley and for valley communities like Stanislaus County going forward. I'm not sure what all of you will take away from today. Some of you may walk out thinking, wow, there were some questions that didn't have very good answers, because there were some really good questions on cards. There were some big picture questions that honestly the folks in this room can't really change or influence on a statewide or federal level. There's some micro questions. So I'm not sure what you take away when you leave, but I'll just share with you what I'm taking away from today. For me, this is our kickoff. This report was issued this week. It's been quite a while in the making, but issued this week. So for me, it's a kickoff. It's our first opportunity to be in a room sharing our learning that has transpired over the last couple of years, as well as the learning that we had here this morning. And by the way, I want to just tell you how impressed I was with our 2 speakers today, with Kate and Mitali. Those were really good presentations. They are experts in their respective fields, and I know we were hopeful that they would be able to join us today, and for them to be able to be here today was a big victory for this effort. I also want to acknowledge, like Mitali, I mean, she literally redesigned McHenry Avenue in her slides. You guys catch that? That's like, she's thinking. She's not just in the concept. She's like, here, I'll just redesign the middle of your city right now. And then Kate, many of you may not have noticed, but Kate gave us about 5 ways in which you could tap the county's general fund, right? So I was paying attention. A lot of subliminal commentary there, but I got you, Kate. I'm watching you. So a lot of great learning and information that I've been on a learning journey throughout this. When we started, I've always said I'm the least knowledgeable person in the room when it comes to housing, but I do know that it is a fabric in any community, and definitely no different here. So I want to learn, and I feel like the process of putting this report together has provided me personally a lot of learning, so I hope you have learned something today as well. But our learning continues. We're not just done. I want to tell you what our commitment is from the county's perspective going forward. We view this as a report card. You know, it's got some potential solutions and things like that as well, but at its core, it is a report card, and that report card needs to be delivered on an annual basis to our community. You know, in government, sometimes folks may hesitate to issue a report card if it doesn't reflect positively. At the county, we feel the opposite. We feel when we're not performing very well somewhere, those are the report cards that we need to put out there as often as we can. And so, bless you. So you should expect that at least once a year we're updating our numbers and we're sharing with everybody what is our trend. Are we trending in the right direction, or are we falling behind further, which is what we heard today by some of this data. So we'll be monitoring these trends and reporting them going forward through additional report cards on an annual basis. We'll continue the momentum under the leadership of our planning department. I want to thank Angela Freitas and Kristen Dowd from our planning department, who've been our 2 key players. You know, I think most of you are probably aware that most housing development occurs in cities, and it should. County leadership believes that that's the best place for housing development to occur. We also have some growth restriction issues within the unincorporated areas, but there's ways in which we can come alongside some of these conversations on missing middle housing and infill properties and so forth. So it's not as if the county doesn't have a role, but generally when it comes to actually producing units that are going to make a difference and move the trend needle, it's not likely to be in the unincorporated areas. And even with that said, our planning department has come alongside us, stepped into a leadership role, and said we'll do anything we can to come alongside and support our colleagues in city planning departments to help them absorb this information, use it in the best way possible, and make sure that our cities are well supported, because when our cities succeed, we all succeed. And that comes directly from our planning department. So thank you, Kristen. Thank you, Angela, for that. Thank you. So we have some momentum. You'll expect, at least from the county's staff perspective, we'll continue to follow up on the recommendations that are in this report. This can't just be something that sits on the shelf and collects dust. We're going to try to get this message out into the community broader, to have more conversations like this, more learning opportunities, to bring in experts in the community, come alongside our cities and developers and anyone else that can help us influence the trajectory. That's the commitments from the county side. We'll convene a housing summit probably on an every other year basis or so, but there'll be lots of individual learning opportunities in between, I believe. Behind you on the slide there, they said, well, what do you want on your slide? And I said, just put our county's mission. And it's simple. We have a 3-word mission at the county. We build community. That's essentially what we're trying to do. It's real easy to understand. And we're trying to build a community that we can all be proud of. And that's part of the vision as well, a place where families live, work, and thrive, a place we can all be proud of, and generally a place worthy of calling home, okay? A place worthy of calling home. Well, you have to have a home to hit that vision, right? If you don't have a home, and if it's so difficult to stay in a home, we'll never meet that vision for our community, and we'll never build the community that we all know we want to see for our own families, as well as the people that we love, and all of our fellow residents of Stanislaus County. So that's been our motivator through this entire effort. I want you to know that we're very humbled by your presence here today. And if there's anything we can do, or you have other ideas for us to improve this process and add to the momentum going forward, please reach out to us. My final thanks are to the team at Valley Vision for helping shepherd this process, Alan and his entire team. I also want to share my appreciation for the MJC support. I think were those the folks reading cards for us today as well, or were they helping us at registration and so forth? Yeah, we've just got a lot of people who pitched in to make this effort happen. And then my final thanks are to the County Board of Supervisors, who 6 years ago, when they appointed me as County Executive Officer, I shared with them we really need to work on a housing conversation. And unfortunately, a thing called COVID got in the way and sidetracked us for a while. But as soon as we could, we got right back to it. And they allowed us to put some of our county financial resources into these conversations and at least spark the conversation for the future. So thank you to them. And thank you once and all for all of you here today. I think we're concluded, Alan. Is that it? Okay, and on your way out, please grab whatever you want off that drink and snack tray, because it's not going to go by itself. So thank you all very, very much. Everybody have a good day.